Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, so I think that the big question is that how do we see Jesus or the gospel in the book of Judges?
So I think the one way that I was seeing it, and this is fortunate because of our teaching schedules, that I'm teaching on Judges and Ruth. And I think that Judges says, so Deuteronomy says, here's the law. Joshua, here's a great example for you in Joshua and a choice before you. Keep the law. Here's you messed up, trying, falling back, sliding, circle, cycle. I'm trying, I can't, I try again, I fail. Back on your feet, things are going well, fail again. That's you, Book of Judges, if you're honest with yourself. And then Ruth comes along and says, even though you are like that, there's a Redeemer coming for you. There's someone who's going to save you coming from the line of Ruth. And that's the whole, because the book of Ruth is all about the kinsman redeemer. And then it's a story about the birth of David's grandfather and how this is, and all these people from Ruth are all in the line of Christ. So that's why I'm thinking about it now. And I want to put some more thought on that, put some more meat on those bones and put that together. But it feels like, this is, your Christian life. Choose well. You're saved in the proper sequence. He's already given you salvation. Now that you're saved, choose well, and you won't. And if you really thought about what it meant to choose well, that standard is way higher than you're capable of doing. And you're not, if you're honest, you're not living up to it. But there's a Redeemer who did it all for you. And that's what Ruth is all about.
Yeah, that's good.
It's coming together slowly, but that's the way I'm putting the pieces together.
Have you thought about in Judges 13 the similarities between Samson and Christ?
No. Tell me about that.
Well, they were both consecrated to God. They were prophesied before birth. The angel prophesied that Samson would free Israel from the Philistines, Israel's enemy, in Judges 13:5. Samson and Jesus were led Holy Spirit powered lives. They both gave away their strength. How about that? I mean, Samson was like far from like a perfect Christ like figure, right?
Yeah.
Both were betrayed. Samson was betrayed by Delilah, and Jesus was betrayed by Judas.
Right.
Both shook up a temple.
Okay, so to speak.
Yeah, Samson destroyed the Philistine temple. Jesus cleansed the temple in Jerusalem. Both offered themselves as living sacrifices to save others.
Yeah.
And they were both deliverers. I don't know.
I like that. I like that. Anything like that that says that where they point to Christ, because I think that I was going to do that with, Ruth and Boaz, types of Christ, point to Christ. But Samson does too. But even as you see that, so Samson early on, he goes over to sleep with a prostitute at one point, early in the story. And then remember, the city gates were locked, and so he couldn't get out. So he just rips the gates out, and it's kind of part of his legend. I'm trying to find it now as we're talking. Anyway, it brings up an important point. Some of these people in Judges, even the good judges that God raises up, like Gideon,
very flawed
in horrible ways.
Yeah.
In deep, horrible ways. I mean, Gideon is like, Gideon's the great hero, and he's referred back to as a hero, like Gideon, who's the deliverer of Israel. He referred back to real positive terms, but he said to everybody after he won, like, get all the earrings, because I guess the people they defeated had gold earrings, melt them down. He created an idol. We're going to worship this idol. Like, okay, that's really awful. It's not. You don't find that in the stories about Moses or Joshua. A bunch of judges are like that. They did things like that.
That's so true. That's so true, and that ties in with one of the things we often say is that a lot of times when we read the Bible, we look at these people as heroes, like Samson, what a hero, but they're very, very, very flawed people, and so it's obviously the Bible's not a bunch of heroes.
No, but God still used them, and they're described as people God did use for what but then who's the one who does the awful vow where he ends up sacrificing his daughter?
Oh yeah.
Was that Jephthah? I think it was Jephthah, one of them.
Yes.
But God didn't ask for a vow where you had to do a child sacrifice. That was like a complete off the rails for him to do. And but yet he was still the instrument that God used at that moment, at that time, to save his people and to deliver them, whatever the peril they were in at the moment. It doesn't not to take away from that. He accomplished that for the Lord, and God was using him for that. But despite the presence of sin in his life, maybe there's a lesson there, Greg. Like, if you wait to clean up your act before you want to be used of the Lord, you'll wait forever, right? God uses horribly flawed people to accomplish his purposes in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, are there other places you see Jesus in the book of Judges?
Well, I had not seen the Samson thing, so I'm glad you brought that up. That's interesting. No, I was really reading Judges. Well, first I was reading it and thinking about lessons I'd heard about the tips and tricks, like don't be bad like these people, make better choices. Then I thought, wait, how's the gospel working here? And then I thought, it's not about our performance in contrast to the nation of Israel in the book of Judges. This is what happens to all of us in the Christian life. It's a roller coaster. It's cycles of victory and defeat and victory and defeat. And then I was looking to Ruth for like the where Jesus shows up, that the Redeemer shows up, because of the whole kinsman Redeemer story in Ruth.
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's some great comparisons between the book of Judges and the book of Ruth. I don't know if you came across.
I came across one list that did like compare.
Yeah, so one like Judges is mainly illustrates spiritual darkness, where in Ruth we see spiritual light. Judges is a book of immorality, where Ruth is about purity. Mm-hmm. Judges is about pursuing idols who are not gods, where Ruth is deciding for the one true God. Mm-hmm. Judges is about disloyalty, where Ruth is about devotion. You could say Judges is a book of lust, where Ruth is a book about love. Mm-hmm. One is about peace and one is about war. Ruth is about peace. Judges is about war. Yeah. I don't know. Have you seen this list?
Yeah, I did. And then, but you can keep going. Judges is about cruelty. Ruth is about kindness. It's really true. It's a real stark contrast.
Judges is about disobedience that brings sorrow, where Ruth is about obedience that brings blessing. In Judges, we see a desert of rebellion, where in Ruth we see an oasis of righteousness. And then finally, Judges, we see the faithlessness of the chosen people, where we see in Ruth the faithfulness of a Gentile alien.
Yeah. Right.
That's pretty interesting. It's some pretty interesting contrast. And I guess the book of Ruth kind of historically appears right in the middle of the book of Judges, like
does it
chronologically? Really?
Well, because the first verse is like at the time of the judges or something like that, right?
Yeah, I saw a chart. I saw a chart that kind of places Ruth right in the middle of the book of Judges, like as far as
the timeline. Oh, yeah, I saw that. Yeah. right in the middle somehow. The first verse of Ruth says, "In the days when the judges ruled."
Yeah.
And there's a
So
family.
that's kind of cool. Um, so in some ways, the story of Ruth is a great picture of redemption.
Yes, it's only 4 chapters long, so it's an easy read.
It
Right.
is. It is.
There's a little bit of a complicated story of family and back and forth. Keller has just got more full disclosure. Keller has a great sermon on this that's available at gospelinlife.com. Kind of talks about the story and bring in how the gospel comes through in the book of Ruth.
Yeah. So what does he say about it?
Well, first you got to get the basic bones of the story. And it gets only 4 chapters, so our listeners can go out and read it in 20 minutes. But basically, Naomi and her husband Elimelech are in Bethlehem in Israel, but there's a famine, so they leave. Let me see if I can recap the story quickly here, Greg. It'll be a little test for me. It'll be good practice. But they leave, and they have 2 sons. And what's interesting, Keller points this out, is that the 2 sons basically have Canaanite names. So it's not like at least the father wasn't. They were following the Lord, but they were kind of mixed in with the Canaanites. But the boys have Canaanite names. They go to Moab. So instead of saying where they're supposed to be and trusting the Lord to get them to the famine, they leave. They go to Moab. They leave their land. They had some land there. They sell it and get rid of it, and they leave and go to Moab. And then when they go to Moab, the 2 boys meet 2 local Moabite women. And they marry them despite all the commands about don't intermarry other strangers and foreigners. And the boys marry them anyway. And then the father dies and the 2 boys die. And all you have left is Naomi, the widow, and the 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And so Naomi says, well, I'm going to go back to my people, my land. And they first say, okay, we'll go with you. And she says, don't go with me. Your life is here. Your family's here. Everybody, your culture. You don't have to do this. Stay here. And Orpah, they weep together. And then chapter 1, verse 14, then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So Orpah says, yep, okay, good idea. And she heads back home with her people. But Ruth says no. And that famous passage that you hear in weddings all the time, right?
Where you go, I will go.
Go ahead.
Your God will be my God. That's what I remember of it.
Yeah. Where you die, I will die. Well, here. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And Keller points out how most of the wedding passages, they print on the bulletin, they don't print the death part. They'll leave that part out. They print the rest of it. But what he brought out, which I thought was interesting, he said, you can read this and say that Ruth is saying to her mother-in-law Naomi, look, I don't really know what your God, I don't know what that's all about, but I'll just go with you to be close to you and help you out.
Right.
She uses the word Yahweh for God. So she uses the familiar kind of loving term for God. So it's indicative that she has adopted that belief. In other words, so she has seen the faith in her mother-in-law, Naomi, maybe not in the father-in-law who's already gone.
Right.
At least in Naomi, who has a faith. Now she's got a conflicted faith. We'll see in a minute, but Naomi definitely has a faith. So Ruth has seen enough faith in her, says, I want what you've got. And I already believe in your God. And so for Ruth, she ends up saving Naomi in the end, right? So she is like a redeemer for Naomi. She's like redeemer number 1. Because at the end of the book, they're saying to Naomi, said, you're so lucky you have Ruth. She's better than 7 sons. And 7 sons is indicative of the perfect family. So when the family was everything in that culture and the perfect family was the top of everything.
Yeah.
Like Ruth is better for you than the perfect family. So she was your redeemer because at the end of the book, she saved you, Naomi. But she did so because Ruth was saying, if I let you go back to your homeland and I stay here in Moab with my people, then I'm going to lose God. I'm not going to be in fellowship with anyone who believes in a living God. And so I got to come with you because I believe in him already, which I thought was a fascinating little detail. But then the guts of the story are that they go back and there's a law, I guess, in Leviticus 25, which I have to go back and read, that said to keep land intact, if you went into poverty, you had to sell your land or whatever, your family, to get the land back, first of all, there's a year jubilee every 50 years when all reset.
Yeah.
And then, but you could also, you have a kinsman redeemer that said if part of your family wanted to, they could buy the land back. So I guess it's like having a call option on the land. So you say, I want to, if you could find someone within your family to buy the land back, even if you had sold it because you needed the money, whatever, someone within the family can be a kinsman redeemer and buy the land back. And I don't think it specifies the price, though. So I think it's like, yeah, you can buy it, but you got to come up with the money. And you have the option. It's like, yep, they have to sell it back to you, but I think they can demand whatever price they wanted. That part, I got to research that in Leviticus 25 because I'm not sure about that.
Huh, I'm not sure either.
But the basic story is Ruth goes out and they get back there. They're dirt poor. They have nothing. So she's going to glean in the fields, which means she's going to basically find whatever grain she can to feed her and her mother-in-law, Naomi. And Boaz owns the field, and Boaz sees her and says, what is she doing here? She's obviously not an Israelite. She's a foreigner. She's a Moabite. And other people tell the story about, hey, she really helped out her mother-in-law, and he's really impressed by that. So he takes care of her and tells his men, don't let anyone touch her or harm her, because she was really vulnerable. She's like a woman alone, a foreigner, like she could have been really hurt. And he tells all the men, stay away from her. And he has great mercy at her, says, you can work with the working women, not just the threshers, but the poor, but the working women, and get this, feed, Naomi with it. And she brings all this stuff back to Naomi. And she gets back there, and Naomi says, do you know who that is? That's Boaz. He's like a relative of ours. He can be a kinsman redeemer for us. You happen to be like threshing at the one guy who can actually save us and get our land back.
And that just shows God's providence, right?
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What a coincidence. She happens to follow Naomi back to Israel. There's all these little things happen. Well, that's a good point, Greg, because God's not mentioned. There's no explicit saying that God is directing these circumstances, but they obviously have to all fall into place for the line of Christ to come to fruition, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so then there's a nifty thing where Naomi says, go back to Boaz and just sleep at the foot of his bed. Don't say anything. And he wakes up in the middle of the night and sees her. That's like, what are you doing here? And she says, put your cloak over me, which is basically saying, marry me, because you can be our redeemer. And then the other part, I need to research some more. He says, no, I can't do that because someone else has the right to it ahead of me. I'll check with them first. And if they want to, they can. But if they don't, I will redeem it. I guess someone else had first dibs on the land. And he checks with that person. That person does not want it. So he marries Ruth, and they have a son. And that son is David's grandfather. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so this is chapter 4, verse 16. Then Naomi took the child. Oh, wait, go back. Verse 14. Then the woman said to Naomi, the mother-in-law, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, not to Ruth, but to Naomi. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. They said it's part of Naomi's family. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
You know, what strikes me about this is that God uses the most unlikely people for his purpose. I mean, throughout, Ruth was poor. She was hurting. She was an outcast. She was a widow. She was
an immigrant. She was a foreigner. She was a Moabite.
Yeah. But through her story, we learn that God uses, the most unlikely people for his purpose. I mean, think about the 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. Tamar resorted to trickery to bear a son. Rahab
Right.
was a prostitute whose faith saved her from the walls of Jericho.
Right.
Ruth was a Moabite and a widow. Bathsheba,
That's the
only
one.
became David's wife after David took her for himself and killed her husband.
Yeah, right. Had an affair, murdered the husband, right?
Mary was a young virgin who was already engaged to Joseph when she became pregnant with Jesus. I mean, it's fascinating. Again, like, we've said this before in the podcast, that if you were to write the Bible,
You would never.
you would never put these things in there.
No, you would, if they were making up a genealogy of Jesus, they would have found different characters. They would have skipped those ones and just not brought it. Let's not mention that.
If you were creating your own religion and you were trying to, paint these people as heroes, you would never put these people in, so it validates the stories.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there because it really happened this way. It's really true.
Yeah. Otherwise you would never put it in there. And the fact that they even put women in the genealogies is controversial.
Yeah, right. Because they wouldn't do that.
They usually wouldn't do that. It wasn't really culturally, recognized. So,
right.
Yeah. So, the book of Ruth it's the book of Ruth. Is it the book of Ruth where God mentioned in the book of Ruth, or I'm thinking Esther?
Esther is a book where God is not mentioned once.
Okay.
God is definitely mentioned here because there's like when Naomi, she says, God has dealt bitterly with me. So Naomi had a faith.
Right.
She was angry at God. She's like, early in the book when they had the famine and they go there, all the men in her life die. She's coming back. Everyone says, oh, you're Naomi, which means peace. Don't call me Naomi. Call me, what's the name? Mara or something, a different name. Because call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity on me? And again, if you were writing this, would you have one of the characters here bad mouthing God and then write it down?
Right.
I mean, this is not just a little. This is like when Abraham doubts God to his face in Genesis 15. Like, really, I'm going to have a son. How will I know? Right? This is like she's just bad mouthing God. He's dealt bitterly with me. I mean, it does set up artistically or narratively the contrast in the end when everything turns out really well, right? So that's a sweetness to it at the end. But she's pretty bitter at God. She says God's dealt very bitterly with me, but at least she still has faith. She's not saying I don't believe in God. She's just saying he's dealt bitterly with me, right? So she hasn't walked away from God, and I think that's what clearly Ruth saw that faith in her. So. Anyway, go say what?
I was going to say, well, why do you think the book of Ruth is in the Bible?
Because I think it's, I don't want to make too much of this because I'm just kind of studying and learning now. I think that whole sequence of following, here's the law, obey it, make good choices. These people don't obey it. They need a redeemer. I mean, I think that sequence of events to this point is creation, fall, redemption. It's that sequence of you're not going to be faithful. I can give you the law. I can spell it out for you. I can tell you again emphatically, make good choices. And by the way, every time it goes bad for you, that cycle that happens again through Judges is over 350 years. They follow, things go well, and then they follow it, things go badly. They get a judge comes up and they do well, and they fall away again. So they have plenty of chances. It's like, it's the same, but it's the same pattern we all have in our lives, Greg. Why do I still sin? When I sin, it goes badly,
Yeah.
And I repent and I'm so sorry and I never want to do it again. And then the Christian life is not that single line upward trajectory of ever one victory after the next getting better and better. It's this growing awareness of your sin and a need for a savior. That's why
we need, what I was thinking is we need a redeemer, how desperately we need a redeemer. And so the book of Ruth shows us Boaz is like a type of Christ.
Yes.
In the sense of, just like Ruth and Naomi needed a redeemer, we need a redeemer. How much more do we need a redeemer?
Absolutely. Ruth is a redeemer for Naomi, and Boaz is a redeemer for both of them. And then of course they all point to the real Redeemer. Both of them point to the real Redeemer, which is coming through Ruth, through the line of David, which is Christ.
So maybe the book of Ruth is intentionally, it occurs during the time of Judges, and it's kind of separate because the book of Judges shows you kind of have these like heroes. The judges become like heroes, but they never truly redeem. Like I don't know. Maybe
no, good point.
Pictures. Maybe. Okay.
Good point. Good point. I think go with that. That's interesting.
Well, I'm wondering, is the book of Judges like a picture of religion, and the book of Ruth is a picture of the gospel, like the difference between religion and the gospel? The book of Ruth really shows a clear picture of redemption. Through the gospel, real life change. But in the book of Judges, we just see it's almost like religion.
It is. It's attempts, right? I'm gonna attempt once again to keep these rules and follow this. And I think you're starting when you start to say like these judges, people. I want a hero. I want if only I had a really good example. If only I had someone like the beginning, like who will fight our battles for us. If only I had a really good example, another hero, then I could really.
How many people even in our day and age, if a spiritual leader falls morally, like their faith is devastated.
They crumble. That's right.
Because they put their faith in that. They put their faith in that leader.
Yeah.
And how many people did the same with these judges?
Yeah.
And it just shows you that we look for things in this world to satisfy us, and our default setting is religion.
Yeah.
And maybe that single line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe that's why they take pains to record the flaws of these judges, that they did idol worship and they did these bad things. They were not.
Because I think Ruth is like a total contrast. Like, that's why even in those parallels we were reading where Judges is so dark, but Ruth is like so light.
Right.
That's like one of the big themes of the Bible, right? Darkness and light.
Yeah.
Religion, the judges, like you said, their moral character stunk.
Right.
Like Samson's, these were not
great examples for us to follow.
These were not great examples to follow. But Boaz, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have any flaws.
He treats her with real tender kindness. Keller brings this out when he preaches on this, and I want to look at this. But like Boaz had to come up with the money to buy this field back, to give it back to the family.
It cost him greatly.
Yeah, is that in here? I got to find that. But it cost him to do this. So the idea of like Boaz also points us to Christ, because he had to be a redeemer at great cost to himself.
So I'm interested in, like, when you teach this, maybe you should teach it as a maybe there's a way to teach it where you share a story in Judges and then you contrast it with Ruth, and then you share a story in Judges and contrast it with I don't know. It's just a thought, but
my worry is I think the way I've heard this preached before, you get through this and then you get right into tips and tricks of how we should not be like the people in Judges and we should do better. And that's the lesson. That's the big takeaway from the book of Judges. I mean, I'll put you on the spot, but I don't want to put that on the guys on the spot. I don't want to actually embarrass anybody. Some of the answers that way says that's what Judges is all about, teaching us to live better lives. And no, I don't think so. I think that's a religious way. Like you said, that's the default mode of the human heart. I want to tell me the rules and I can keep them. I'll be my own savior. I can do it. Oh, they failed. They were terrible. I wouldn't do that. I'll be much better. I'll be faithful where they were faithless. Yeah, you won't. And if you think that's where your life is going, you are blissfully unaware of your own sin. You're way out of touch with reality, the reality of your own sin. You need a redeemer.
Yeah. I think that's good. I mean, any final thoughts you want to? I think this is a great start.
Yeah, it's a good start. I got a lot of gaps to fill in. Like we appreciate if anyone listening to this, the patience with it, because we're just reading kind of these things raw. We do a little, digging and kind of talking them through and bouncing these ideas off each other. Like I really do want to go back to Leviticus 25 and read what the kinsman redeemer, process was all about. And but and hopefully in a couple of weeks some of it comes together. And for our listeners, stay tuned. We'll publish the results later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.